Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Exercise Mechanic Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Paul Oneid. Paul, how's it going, man?
Good, man. How are you?
Excellent. Excellent. I'm excited to get to know you better. And I figured in an effort to get to know you better, I have a little bit of a curveball question to get us started today.
Sure.
Holiday season's coming up. We're going to pretend like you're Santa, and you can give one enormous lump of coal to one fitness professional who's just like spreading misinformation, the one that you despise the most. Who's getting the coal?
It better not be me.
Okay. to be completely fair, I am completely apathetic to the fitness industry.
Okay.
So the reason I say that is, number one, I don't wish negativity on anybody, and I would never put my morals or ethics on anyone as either. I kind of look at my role in the fitness industry as elder statesman. I'm almost 40 years old. I've been doing this since I was 18, as someone who is just trying to, like, as my company slogan is, like, just raise the bar. So just put out better information so that hopefully it gets found. There's a lot of people who, like, I laugh at because I see the ridiculousness in their posting. Like, for all of his accolades and accomplishments, you look at a guy like David Weck, the inventor of the Bosu ball.
Yeah.
He's a business genius when it comes to making money and selling, but he's like blowing into a conch shell and like chewing on a cigar and doing like weird gang signs with his hands. So like that kind of stuff bothers me. I do also think that there's some issues with the over promotion of performance enhancing drugs to the general population with a lack of accountability and knowledge. I think there's a tremendous amount of over-complication of the fitness and health process. I would say my biggest lump of coal would go to anyone who is raising the barrier of entry to fitness. I think our goals as educators is to help as many people as possible have access to the information required to get healthy and fit. And the more that we muddy the waters, I think the harder we make that for people.
I love that. And so for those that perhaps haven't been exposed to this idea that there are perhaps overcomplications that are creating further barriers to, physical practices, whether that be bodybuilding or even just people exercising for the sake of health, what would be some examples for the uninitiated of some examples that come to mind for you of unnecessary barriers for fitness and health?
Telling people that they have to do one thing or something else, you have to track macros, or you have to eat paleo, or you have to do single joint externally stabilized movements in the sagittal plane at all times, these things that perpetuate movement as either a dichotomy of good or bad, beneficial or useless. These are things that I kind of try to actively rally against. There are, like anything, there are trade-offs, there are pros, there are cons to every decision that you make in fitness. But ultimately, our goal is to serve our clients and to meet them where they are. So if you have a client who is I think we all coach clients. So we all have been in situations, probably more so now than ever in our careers, where our clients are coming to us with massive amounts of these limiting beliefs as to what they have to do to get fit. You have clients who, I have to do fasted cardio. It's like, well, no, you don't. You could also do cardio at literally any other point during the day. You have to make sure that you have high glycemic carbohydrates during your training, or you have to, like any number of these things. My biggest piece of advice to anyone in fitness, whether you are someone coming into the fitness space to try and get yourself fit, or you're trying to help others get fit, is to learn how to build a toolbox and a repertoire of information and strategies that you can apply directly to the person to create a runway of progression. We don't all start at these high level. Great analogy. Sometimes you need a chisel. Most people just need a chainsaw. Right? You need something to cut the tree down. Once the tree is cut down, so if we're talking in the context of building a muscular physique, if you're not in that like top 1% of physiques, you don't need to train your iliac lat. You just need to row and pull down and get bigger. And that can be done through any number of means. Whatever you find enjoyable is what you're going to do the most and do to the best of your abilities, put the most effort into. So I just kind of went on a bit of a rant there, but I think I got my point across.
One thing that I think you and I and Ryan, or perhaps yourself and the exercise mechanic as a whole that we have in common is not losing the forest for the trees, and that there's things that seems like that you've learned through your career that are useful tools for certain people at certain points in their progression, and for others it's just not necessary. And that, for instance, like they might be useful for one person, but then when another person comes in front of you, depending on who they are, their interests, their goals, etc., you may not choose to pull that lever. And it really
Absolutely.
seems also like you approach things with a certain amount of kind of emotional neutrality. I don't love any of these things. These are just tools, and I use them as a means of eliciting a response.
Yeah, I'm pretty agnostic to methodology, and I'm religious about results. That's what I typically say.
That's going to be the title of the episode, 100%.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. TM.
That's right. Yeah, hell yeah, that's all yours.
So something I sort of think about when you're talking about this, and all three of us have been in the industry, well over a decade. I think especially with social media, something we all come across is people who are in a position, especially say if they've got like a large following, and there being that, black and white presentation of certain information, potentially misinformation. I always think of when you're in a position where people look up to you, especially if you're charging money for services, there is a responsibility that you have of making sure that you deliver things with, as much accuracy as possible, compassion, empathy, etc. And I think that leadership is actually a really important quality that individuals within the fitness space need to have. I know, especially for yourself, not just being someone who is a coach to clients, but now especially like a coach to coaches. How much do you try to cultivate like leadership skills amongst those coaches?
Well, first I will say that your assessment of what is required of an influencer is one that has integrity. And that's because you have integrity. And, if there's one lesson I've learned in my life, it's that we are not other people. So if we look at the industry as a whole and we pick out all the bad eggs, because we're going to be more sensitive to the negativity than we are to the positivity, we're just going to drive ourselves nuts, and we have no control over what other people do. Now, to the second point of your question, like cultivating leadership, I think that is my number one job, because being a leader is so much more than telling people what to do and directing people in one way or another. It's about learning how to communicate actively. It's about learning how to read people. It's about understanding people's underlying motivations. And it's about putting them in positions where they can themselves be leaders. When we talk about building a business, and coaching other coaches, my biggest goal is for everyone to see that you can build a successful business on integrity and on service. You don't have to fall into the trap of, being a social media influencer to build your business. When it comes to social media, you do have to play the game, right? So if we look at the hierarchy of social media, and I've had to learn this because people are using social media as the primary means to market their business, and that's completely asinine, but I'll leave it at that. You have to get eyes on what you're doing. So if you want to get eyes on what you're doing, you have to be polarizing in some sense. You have to evoke an emotional reaction. You have to, appeal to that reptile brain. In order to do that, you might have to, do some clickbaity stuff. Here's where I would differ. I think what gets people in the door doesn't have to be what keeps them in the room. So if your clickbaity thumbnail gets people to look at your reel, and the reel itself has some value, I posted a reel the other day that, the thumbnail was, I didn't post this thumbnail, but I was going to. It was like, am I fat? And it was a picture of me doing like a most muscular. And I've been dieting for a while. I'm quite lean, but I don't think I'm fat. The post was about body image and body dysmorphia in physique athletes. So the post itself to me had value and integrity, but the thumbnail was kind of clickbaity and tried to get people's attention. Reels are for that purpose, right? Reels are going to get shown to the people who aren't following you more so than the people who are following you. So if you're trying to look at growing your audience, you want to post reels that evoke emotion. Then when you look at carousels or pictures or sequences of videos mixed in with text, those are going to get shown primarily to your followers. So if you're going to educate, you want to educate to people who are already invested in hearing what you have to say. So post your education in that type of content. And then when it comes to like promoting your services, then you go to stories, because the stories are going to be shown to the people who interact with your content the most. So if you look at, rather than looking at social media as a whole, as the top of your funnel, look at each type of post and interaction as a level within that funnel, ultimately leading to either them providing their email for a lead magnet or booking a call with you. The goal should always be to go through that funnel, get them off of social media so that you can communicate with them in a more intimate way. And I think in being a leader, it starts with leading the people that you currently serve, right? I've had a number of conversations with clients. I'd actually love your guys' insight on this. Leadership when it comes to coaching is an interesting dynamic because there is a power dynamic, right? You are in charge. At the same time as you're trying to be empathetic, at the same time as you're trying to meet the client where they are, there has to be an element of my clients want to make me proud. So that Hawthorne effect, that overseer effect, where just by virtue of them having a coach, they're going to make different decisions than if they didn't have a coach. We have to leverage that to some degree, but we don't want to do it to a point where the client feels guilt or shame when they don't live up to the expectations that we've set for them. Maybe how have you guys found that dynamic, or how have you leveraged that dynamic within your coaching practice? I think that's always really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think to sort of your earlier point, I agree 100% in the idea that whether you acknowledge it or not, that power dynamic is integrated into that relationship. And oftentimes I view that client and coach relationship honestly almost like being a parent, in the sense that, so like your job as a parent, I don't have kids, so maybe I'm talking on my ass here, but your job as a parent is ultimately to like provide your children with all the necessary tools, support, etc., to become functioning adults when they leave the home. Mm-hmm. Right? In the same way that like my job as a coach with my clients is to give them all of those tools, support, etc., so that they succeed in the areas that they want to. And eventually somewhere down the road, it might be 6 months, it might be 6 years, they are a fully functioning fitness person on their own.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, and this is something that I've felt more strongly the more I've gotten involved in bodybuilding, I find there is a lot of ego in the coaching realm, in particular around bodybuilding, where people will take their client wins as their own. Mm. And that's something that I really struggle with, because I recognize that, yes, I had a hand in, helping them win a show or whatever it happens to be. But it's my client's success, not my own.
100%.
So I'm really cautious about even the way I'll word things, like celebratory posts, for example, for a client, where I try very much not to make it about myself, and I make it about them. Mm-hmm. So I think to a certain degree, there's a level of like thanklessness to being a coach, and you have to sort of check your ego at the door, where I'm doing all of these things to help my client succeed in whatever area that they want. So the reason why I say that is I think that if you go into a relationship in the same way, a friendship, a romantic partnership, whatever, if you lead with the thing that I care about the most here is supporting you, loving you, whatever it happens to be, I think all of your actions start to reflect that, and people feel that.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
Like my clients aren't worried about whether I'm doing a thing for myself. I'm not trying to, take their successes as though I did everything, so on and so forth. So if we have potentially a tough love conversation, which is always going to happen as a coach, they know where it's coming from. And I think that's really important. So I don't know if that entirely answers your question, but
For sure.
It for me, it always starts with the foundation of that is I understand that my role in that relationship is exclusively to get them better and doing all the things that I can to do that. And if I have to have conversations that are like, look, I've told this story a few times, so I think it's a good example, especially because she's like a fantastic client. I had a client do her first bikini show this end of September. She ended up sweeping all 3 classes, like won gold in all of them. She looked amazing. She's an awesome client. And I think it was, 6 to 10 weeks into prep. We did like a 25-week prep. I had given her sort of a free meal at the end of one of her high days. And I typically put some structure around what that looks like. And I think the following day she had come to me where essentially it all counted as one meal if she never stopped eating. She did like the Dave Tate approach. And it was just like, she
Fully
just
support this.
Yeah, she went just fucking ham on this. And I remember, and I typed something out, deleted it, typed something out, deleted it. And I was like, okay, this is a moment that like honestly could be like a make or break thing with trust.
100%.
Like she knows she fucked up.
Yeah.
I don't need to tell her that. And like, because all that does is start to erode that trust between the two of us. And there's always like a long-term ramification of that. I always think of like, you can't unburn wood.
Yeah.
So it's like, I need to tell her like, hey, like obviously for certain reasons, like you have these goals. These are sort of the plans we set out. This is what happens if you do this. And also like everyone's been there. At the end of the day, one meal, 15 weeks out from your show is not going to matter. So we ended up having this really positive dialogue where it didn't happen again. I didn't shame her, etc. But like I understood that conversation was really, really pivotal, and I could have handled it one of several ways. And if I had just been like, "Oh, this fucking idiot," blah 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 blah, all that would have done is make our relationship worse, and at the end of the day, potentially made her results worse. And that's what I'm here for.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the parental relationship because all of our clients call me and Liv mom and dad.
I've seen that.
Which I think is hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah. It's coming back to your question, Paul. And so first off, I wanted to say, like, I completely agree with what you guys said. When you were talking about how do we kind of like navigate perhaps this power dynamic with our clients, how do we navigate leading them perhaps towards their goals? If I understood correctly, I feel like there was lots of layers to your question, but for me, the thing that I've noticed for myself that makes or breaks things, I think the most for myself, how I communicate with clients is whether or not I pre-frame the journey for them effectively or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also that I address what I think is a limiting belief that a lot of my clients have. And some of my clients, like yourself, I also do some mentorship with fitness professionals. One of the biggest limiting beliefs that I've found is that they make the mistake of putting me on a pedestal. And then by extension, they lower themselves and they disempower themselves. So one of the first things that I'll tell them at the beginning of the journey is don't make the mistake and don't do yourself the disservice of putting myself on a pedestal, because I'm figuring this shit out just like you are. And as much as there's certain things that I've perhaps figured out because I've just been doing it longer than you, that doesn't mean that I'm net more capable than you or you are less capable than I. So this isn't, I try to eradicate this type of like top down, I am on a pedestal more so than them. And I try to bring them on level playing field so that we can link arms, so to speak, and move towards their goal together. That's the first one. And then the second thought that I had to your question when it comes to kind of pre-framing it, the journey, is just letting them know that it's going to be messy, and
Yeah.
that fundamentally that like we have perhaps an initial idea of maybe how we're going to go about doing things, but at best that it's a rough draft, and this is going to be co-created together, and that that, like you were saying, Ryan, that fundamentally the ground from which I operate is from a place of love and care,
Mm-hmm.
and everything that I do flows outwards from that. And so sometimes that looks like patience. Sometimes that is telling you that you like, that if it smells like shit, like everywhere you go, check your feet kind of thing. Like if you keep creating the same problems, like you're the problem. And sometimes the loving thing to do is to like show them that and allow them to feel the discomfort associated with hard truths. So for me, I found that like those two conversations for me are perhaps the most important, and they usually happen during the consultation
Yeah.
before they even sign up. So that way they understand like this is kind of how I work. This is how the service is, and I understand that I can't perhaps paint a picture of the details of exactly what it'll look like, but this is how we make decisions together.
Yeah, we actually have a part of our intake process that's 9 questions to create a healthy coach athlete relationship. So we'll actually ask our clients point blank, like, how do you want me to celebrate your wins? How do you want me to communicate with you when you're not living up to our expectations? How do you want to be motivated? All of these questions, supremely important to creating that coach athlete relationship, which again, Ryan, starts with care and love. And when you organize your business, so if you're going to operate your business from a place of integrity and a place of love, caring, and empathy, your business practices take care of themselves. It's like,
Totally.
if I want to act with integrity, what kind of content should I be putting out? Mm-hmm. Cool. If I want to lead with care, how should I communicate with my clients? How often should I communicate with my clients? Through what medium? How should I deliver the messages? Am I going to use texting? Am I going to use voice notes? Am I going to use video messaging? How often should I hop on calls with them? Should I give them access to my calendar? All of these things play into, well, what do I need to provide in order to feel as though I'm leading from care and support? So yeah, I love the answers. I think we're all definitely on the same page.
No doubt.
So, something I wanted to talk about, if we can kind of keep leaning into, I guess, talking about like kind of running a coaching business.
Sure.
Obviously, because you work with a variety of different coaches, what do you think are the keys for like new coaches when it comes to starting their business? Okay. And maybe what are some of the pitfalls? And then also, how does that maybe shift once they start trying to sustain a business?
Okay, great question. So the first thing I will say is one of the rules of thumb when I have coaches come in, and I've had more and more coaches hire me that have literally never run an online business. So they're starting from scratch. One of the core tenets of creating your business offers is if it doesn't work with 50, don't do it with 5. So if you're going to have an offer that includes a 1 hour call. This is just like a grandiose example. No one does this. Even 30-minute call with all of your clients once a week. Well, if you had 50 clients, that's 25 hours of calls per week. That doesn't scale. You can't do that and actually coach the process. Another one is if you're going to price your service at $50 a month, you can't provide the level of service you want to within the given hours that would be associated with and actually live a life. So all of these things kind of play in. So if it doesn't work with 50, don't do it with 5. The next is create some systems and processes that are scalable from beginning to end in terms of what are your terms of service? Right? What are the services that you're providing? What are the expectations of the client? What are the expectations that the client should have of you during the entire process? Making that a standard operating procedure that your clients have access to and sign right from the beginning, so that they know upfront, what am I getting for my dollars? The next is having system of payment where you're not consistently having to invoice your clients. This is a big mistake that I see a lot of coaches make, where they're sending monthly invoices as opposed to an automatic billing. We want to do everything that we can to separate the relationship from the transaction. So I like to look at coaching as a utility, kind of like your hydro bill, right? You're paying for your coaching every month. You're going to get this relationship. You don't really think about it because it's coming out of your account. Cool. Then from there, you have to look at when you are serving the client, how are you engaging them throughout that process to make sure that you're fostering that relationship and hopefully generating more referrals. Chances are, if you've never coached online, you don't have an audience. So your main source of business is going to be referrals and leveraging your existing network. So compiling a list of connections that you might have and trying to leverage those as best that you can through emails, text messages, DMs, reach outs, and doing so in a way where you are offering sales as a service. And that's like a bit of a mindset shift that I've had to teach people to make is, I don't want to sound salesy. Well, no, you're not sounding salesy. If you feel like you can help someone and you don't actively try to help them, you are denying them of that help. And the only way that you can help them is to enter into a coaching relationship and guide them through the process. And again, if you start with that goal, the way that you communicate will flow outwards, right? You're not going to reach out and say, hey, thanks for the follow. Do you need a coach? You're going to reach out.
That's exactly what I do.
Yeah, I know. Vince Del Monte, fire it up.
Yeah, exactly.
It's, hey, thanks for the follow. If there's anything you need, let me know. My goal is to provide value. Happy to help. Mm-hmm. That's a much different message to a new follower than, hey, I'm going to sell you something because you followed me immediately. So some pitfalls that you're going to run into early on as a coach is, number one, learning how to sell your services, making sure that you represent yourself in a way that will appeal to your ideal client, and actually defining that within the process. Like, who is it that I'm actually looking to serve? Mm-hmm. And admittedly, this is an area where I really struggle because my ideal client has changed so much over the years, right? My ideal client used to be that collegiate athlete. Then it was the elite level power lifter. Then it was a mix of like CEOs, professionals, and now I'm coaching a lot of coaches. So my ideal avatar for different posts might be quite different. But if I'm trying to represent myself in a certain way, I have to appeal to that certain person. And this is something that we're actively investing in as a company because I now own a coaching company with 6 other coaches, my wife included. So our business cannot just be the Paul and Olivia show. It has to be Master Athletic Performance. So how do we represent Master Athletic Performance as a brand and allow all of our coaches to take the spotlight? So again, it's changed in that regard. So we're investing heavily into like brand strategy and things of that nature to help us further define who we are as a company so that the company can grow independent of us. And these are these forward thoughts. So if you're setting up your business, say you have to have that forward thinking approach. So say you're deciding whether you want to use True Coach or Coach Catalyst for your coaching. Both fantastic apps for what they are. If I only coach training, I'm probably going to go with True Coach because it's just a much easier platform when you look at the user interface for programming. But I have to make that decision now that I'm never going to coach nutrition, because you can't coach nutrition through True Coach. And the last thing you want to do is set up your infrastructure on an app that you're going to have to port over at a later date when you have 50, 60 clients. It's an absolute nightmare. Trust me, we just did it. Mm-hmm. So again, the forward thinking aspect of it. So I would plan out your goal trajectory over the next, 1, 3, and 5 years and make sure that your business decisions align with where you'd like to go. Those 3 and 5 year goals, I guarantee you they will change. But at least when you start with that like destination in the GPS, you can adjust the destination and the GPS will recalculate itself. But if you're just, throwing darts at a wall and hoping something sticks, like, you're going to be running into problems. So that's a few things.
I love that. And I think like one of the things that you're really highlighting is the importance to at least consider, is this scalable from the beginning?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I know myself, I've made that mistake for sure. A lot of folks that I've worked with throughout the years as well, folks meaning fitness professionals, have made that mistake as well, where they're just like, well, okay, great. Like, what's the platform that I need, or how, like to like just do what I need to do now, right? To service
Mm-hmm.
the people that I have now. And that's understandable, because usually at the beginning it's really scrappy. Sometimes it's really like time bound by like financial limitations and stuff like, and I get that. And as much as that's true, to try to find a way to also think long, at least medium term in you know, in terms of like beyond just your immediate needs, into like, well, okay, can I even grow within this model, or is it a foregone conclusion that within a year the you know, I'm reaching the end of this runway in terms of this thing that I've built, and then I'm going to have to recreate it at that point, which, like you said, can be messy. And sometimes it might be easier to do some of that work at the beginning if you have the foresight and perhaps the guidance.
Well, that's when you have the time, right? If you're in working in your business, like in your business, serving clients, and you have, 20, 30, 40 clients, the time commitment starts to climb, and you just have less and less time to do that brainstorming. And, to further elaborate on another point, like when you are entering into the business, you want to stop being a person who coaches people and start being someone who owns a coaching business. Those are two different things. Okay. Now, you need to define like what it is that you truly want to do as a coach. Perfect example, myself versus my wife. We co-own the company. She wants nothing to do with the business side. She wants nothing to do with coaching other coaches. She wants nothing to do with educating. She wants nothing to do with podcasting, although she will do Q&As, thank God. The goal for her is to just, I want to provide the best service possible to my clients. If that's you, maybe entering into your own business probably isn't the move. Because if you just want to coach your clients and provide a high level of service, you're better off partnering with somebody or working for another company, paying them a revenue split that makes sense so that they can take care of the business, the cost of operations, the promotions, the marketing. You don't have to do any of that. You could just coach your clients, and that's okay. At least in that situation, you can learn from that person. And if you do end up moving on in your business and want to go on your own, at least you have the background of like, okay, these are the systems that my previous employer was using. I can kind of model my future business off of that. But if you enter into the business not knowing necessarily where you want to go, like I went through that whole trajectory where I was just like, I'm just going to coach clients. And I was doing it as a side hustle at the time. Like, cool, it's going to be my side hustle, whatever. Then I realized that I could make way more money online, and I was really, really enjoying it. I went out on my own, and then all of a sudden my wife came on board. I was like, wow, being part of a team is pretty cool. Let's build a team. So I started adding people to the team, and then we're like, okay, our infrastructure doesn't support this volume. We need to make a big shift. And that's what happened this year. We switched over our entire back end. We switched our website. We switched our CRM. We switched our payment portal. We switched our client delivery service. We went through a massive transition in 2024, but now we have that future runway of scalability that we can pretty much do whatever we need to do with however many coaches we want to do. That took a lot of time and a lot of money. Had we done that from the beginning, we would have been in a much better situation. But I didn't know that at the beginning. I just know that I wanted to provide a great service to my clients, which has allowed me to build the roster that I've built to carry forward. I'm also in a position where, having done this for so long and having such a large network, like I don't need to coach at the scale that I used to coach, nor do I really want to at this point. I want to work with like a select group of 35 to 40 people, keep it really niche, and then do my education and my mentorship as well. But I have some of my coaches that my coach Jaden, Jaden wants to have a full roster. For him, he's defined his full roster as 80 people. So we're working with him to support the back end of what he needs to, in order to acquire those 80 people. And we're teaching him how to serve at scale with the systems and processes that we put in place. Jaden, even though Jaden has 200,000 Instagram followers, He has no desire to run a back end of a business. He has no desire to do email marketing. He has no desire to build automations and websites and things like that. He just wants to coach. And we offer him a fantastic revenue split so he can do what he needs to do. It's a great relationship. Right? So defining what that is and what you want to do early on is definitely helpful.
There was something you had said earlier that I wanted to touch on. You're talking about, if it doesn't work for 50, then don't do it for 5 or something along those lines. One of the big pitfalls that I think I see a lot of coaches get into, especially very early on when they're trying to attract business, is what their monthly cost is. And I think a lot of people end up in this position where they potentially underprice themselves. So I don't know if you have thoughts on pricing being a tool, not not just as a means of generating income, but also as a way of, potentially working with the right type of clientele, the way of also your price, things that are more expensive, there's also a higher perceived value. This is something I think anybody that's worked in a corporate gym setting understands. As I moved up levels and was eventually a level 5 trainer with my body, you'd get a lot of younger trainers like, how do you sell so much? I'm like, people look at me as a level 5 and just assume that I'm better because I cost more. Half of that job has already been done for me. So I don't know, what kind of conversations do you have around the pricing aspect with some of your mentees?
That's a fantastic question. And it's a conversation that evokes so much emotion when you're speaking about it with people. And to put this into perspective, so when I started coaching online, I think I started taking online clients 2009. I started coaching personal training in 2007, and then 2009 online through email started. Then it was Facebook Messenger. Then it was Google Sheets and stuff like that. I remember before I would send an Excel file, and then they would fill it out and send it back to me. So the Excel file only existed in an email format, never existed on my hard drive. Anyway, I charged $50 a month back then. People were like, well, man, that's pretty expensive, man. Now for coaching, training, and nutrition, I charge $750. So that's come with experience, evidence, perceived value, expertise, all of these things. The way that I sell that is exactly how we've talked about it before, right? It's leading with care, showcasing that you can get them results, appealing to their true underlying motivations, and establishing yourself as the one person who can solve their problems. Your price point needs to be something that, number one, you're comfortable charging, right? Especially at first. Next is, who is your ideal client? Take one of our coaches, Nat. So Nat works primarily with beginner powerlifters in the 18 to 25 age group. He cannot charge $400 a month. They don't have $400 a month. I see how many defaulted transactions go through every month, and he only charges $200 a month. So you have to look at who that ideal client is and who you want to serve. How much money do they actually have? And then you want to price yourself at a point where that price point kind of stings. So it needs to be high enough that the perceived value of fucking up is high enough that you won't do it. What I mean by that is, if I'm paying, let's say $400, $500 a month, I'm going to be more invested, literally and figuratively, into my adherence. So I'm going to be more willing and bought in to do the things that I need to do in order to be successful. So as your price point scales, what you will see is a higher, I want to say value of client, but a higher quality of client in terms of the adherence and the buy-in that they have. But as you scale your pricing, you become more and more and more of a disposable expense. So if someone is ever running into financial issues, your ability to retain that client at that higher price point will dwindle. So as you scale price point, yeah, you're making more money, but your churn rate will likely be higher. So there are trade-offs. You want to price yourself in a range where you are charging for the value that you provide to the person that can afford it but just barely, and then continue to slowly, incrementally increase over time. And you will get to this highest level of price point possible within the category of coaching that you coach. I don't foreseeably think that I could increase my pricing more than $750 a month and still retain clients to the degree that I do. Like I have a client who's been with me for 9 years, right? And he's been with me from the moment I was charging 50 to the now 750. How do I scale from here? Well, you have to always have a plan. So say you have, to your knowledge, extended your price point to the highest degree you can within the category that you're coaching. What can you do now? Well, instead of charging once a month, charge once every 4 weeks. Okay. If we provide a weekly service, so instead of charging once a month, you charge once every 4 weeks, you immediately get 2 more payment cycles per year. So if you're making 10 grand a month, you're going to actually now be making 10 grand 13 times as opposed to 12 because you've added those 2 more payment cycles. And then what you could do as Canadians, switch from CAD to USD. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, what you do is you price the USD just slightly above the conversion. So like, I think the last time I checked, 750 CAD was like 586 USD. So if I was to switch to USD from CAD, I would price myself at 600 CAD, right? So just a little bit above. You immediately make more money right off the top. So there are ways to scale income without necessarily scaling price point. The other thing to consider is, say you charge $5,000 a month. Okay, we'll take the Greg Doucette.
That's the vigorous Steve method.
We'll do the Greg Doucette. 15 grand a month for coaching.
Is that for real?
Yes.
Holy shit.
How many clients do you really have to work with?
40.
Right. But like, so if you look at your price point and the degree to which you need to carry a client load. So at my current price points, I carry a client load of between 35 and 40 people. Mm-hmm. Well, my price points are either 400 or 750. You can do the math. Mm-hmm. I don't need to coach more than that many people because, to be fair, number one, I have other things that I want to do. But how much money do you really want and need to be making, especially in Canada, right? You're going to be paying 53% income tax on that money. And again, defining what it is you determine as quality of life and the basement. Like, another thing that I like to consider when talking about price point is hours worked. So the way that I market my mentorship is I will teach you how to acquire more clients, serve them to a higher level, retain them for longer at a higher price point. If you do that, your income will scale. Mm-hmm. And then my mentorship effectively becomes free because you'll make back your money. Now, within that model, when we look at the things that need to be done in order to get to that point, it becomes very simple, right? But having an understanding of how many hours per month are you spending per client? With the systems and processes that we use, I typically can get people down to about 90 minutes a month. So which is around 20 minutes a week. That's including like video reviews, check-in time, all that stuff. Now, 90 minutes a month times 50 people is 75 hours per month. Let's round it to 80 divided by 4 is 20 hours a week. 20 hours a week plus 1.5 because you have to factor in admin time. That's about 30 to 35 hours a week of work when you talk about like social media posting, writing emails, doing like podcasting and promotions and things like that. That is work that you are not being paid for, quote unquote. That has to be factored in. So with 20 hours of coaching and 50 clients, you're actually working about 35 hours a week. If you're working 35 hours a week, how much money do you want to be making for those 35 hours a week? And charge that per client. Mm-hmm. Easy math. Even taking personal trainer at Movati level 5, what are you making an hour? What is Movati charging per hour?
I think it's 115 an hour.
So 115 an hour multiplied by 1.5 That's your monthly price point to start. Right? Because you're essentially providing personal training through a virtual medium. Where you get into like communicating additional value is, well, at Movati, I have you for 3 hours a week. Online, I have you for 24 hours a day. This is where that price point starts to scale and you can start to communicate more value. But if you're just looking for a blanket starting point, it's like, all right, 1.5 times whatever my hourly rate is as a personal trainer, that's what I'm charging for online.
Mm-hmm. We've talked, interestingly, a fair amount about sales today, which I'm really happy that we're doing, because if we're talking about a bottleneck, like something that really gets in the way of really fantastic trainers who have a really great skill set, who have a fantastic potential to help people when it comes to their skills on the floor, and yet so many, like our industry just like chews and spits out people who just can't figure out how to overcome some of the internal conflict associated with sales. And I'm curious, from your perspective, to what point, or how would I say, how important is continuing education in your eyes when it comes to like continuing education that is designed to improve skill set? To what degree have you found that improves trainer confidence and then by extension sales? And how do you kind of reconcile perhaps, continuing education to address just the insecurities of a fitness professional that is sometimes getting in the way of their sales? And then also just like straight learning how to sell by doing sales training.
Okay, so I think my answer is going to surprise you a little bit, considering I have a company that sells education. Mm-hmm. I think improving your skill set is valuable to a point. How many young coaches really lack the ability to serve their clients because they just don't have enough skill? I think it's very few, right? And I'll be the first to say that as you expand your toolbox, you become more adaptable, you become better able to triage situations and adapt and like mold the intervention to the individual, which is going to improve service. Of course, I'm totally down with you. But I think this has been on my mind a lot lately as I look at the model of my education business. Is I think online education to purely increase skill set is a race to zero. Because AI is going to completely replace the need to take courses. Where the value of education comes in is implementation. Mm-hmm. So if you can present information in a way that individual can apply it directly to a situation, and you can teach them how to critically think about problems, that is where the value of education comes in. To the next point, hire a fucking mentor. If you want to expedite your learning, whether it be practical or sales or marketing or business, please just invest the money to pay for a mentor to teach you how to avoid the problems. The biggest hidden cost associated with starting a business is opportunity cost. Mm-hmm. Time lost is money spent. So if you can get to where you want to be in a 3-month mentorship by spending $7,500 that would have otherwise taken you a year, and during that mentorship, you learned how to market your services to a point where you're generating new leads and holding them longer and charging a higher price point, you've made back probably 5 to 10 fold that $7,500 within the year that you would have spent spinning your wheels. And that initial price point of $7,500 is like a big chunk of money. But if you're saving that opportunity cost, you're more than making up your time, right? This is an area where when I wanted to start a mentorship, I reached out to somebody who ran a mentorship and said, teach me what you do. None of us gatekeep, right? Like and to be fair, the amount of free information that I give out and that I'm willing to give out, man, I could charge tons of money for it. And I don't, because I want more good coaches. And we have to have that as educators. I know even by hosting this podcast, you guys agree with me that the more great coaches that we have in the industry, the larger the industry will grow. So even if we get a smaller piece of the pie is huge. Mm-hmm. We're going to make more money. I just want to create more great coaches. If I looked at it with this limited mindset, this, this limiting belief that if I made more great coaches, I would take away from my own business.
Yeah.
Dude, again, a race to zero. So as someone who is entering into the industry, we want to look at how do we expedite, how do we compress time? What are the tools available to us to do that? Yes, we need to expand our skill set. So investing in continuing education and courses is important, but just make sure whatever course you register for has that practical application component, has the ability to interact with the instructors. That is paramount. Then on the other side of things, on the business marketing side, just hire a mentor, get it over with, and find someone that you trust. I don't even care if it's me, right? Hire somebody that you know operates with the same morals and values that you do and has evidence that they've helped others build their businesses to the point where you want to be, right? Excellence leaves clues. So go look for the clues. Stop trying to figure out how to do it on your own. And again, like I feel like a bit of a hypocrite saying that because to a large degree, I did do it on my own, but that's why I see the value in mentorship because I know how much money and time I could have saved.
For sure. It's interesting. So your answer doesn't surprise me at all, actually. And I love that you went in that direction. And you mentioned essentially like the importance of like implementation. And how do I say? I think there's something that is very palpable listening to you speak. And I'd be curious whether or not you agree, Ryan. And for those that are listening, let us know in the comments as well. There is a depth of understanding that you have about what you do that informs your ability to say what you say with conviction. And how would I say, like, and this is something that I find seems to be really true, that the more that we understand what we do, whether that be, actually, no, and I'll back up. And this depth of understanding cannot just come from book learning. It comes from implementation and time in the trenches, whatever that looks like. But that depth of understanding allows you to say what you need to say from a place of integrity, to say the truth. And sometimes that leads to you acquiring a client, and sometimes it doesn't. And I'm going to bet that when it comes to you, and correct me if I'm wrong, like if I'm wrong, please tell me. But I'm guessing that you probably don't give a shit in a sales process whether or not you close somebody or not.
No, I don't.
Yeah.
I care if I help them.
Yeah.
100%. And that is the mark of, I would say, at least in my experience, folks who truly understand what they do, like the nuanced reality that even, for yourself, who evidently has a lot of various tools and perspectives to offer. There's definitely some people that for who like you're absolutely the wrong fit as a coach, and myself included, and Ryan included. And so being like detached to the outcome in my mind flows outwards from mastery. Yep. And understanding that mastery is something that's acquired, through repetition and practice and getting time in the trenches, and also learning. Does that feel true to you?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I like to use training as a proxy for a lot of things in life, just because it's something that has always been a part of who I am. At the core of it, everything that we do is a skill, and skills built on sets and reps. So let's just do a lot of sets and reps, and then we'll just get better over time. And don't try to rush the process and skip steps. I think that is an area where I feel more and more. I wrote a blog about this a while back about how there is a constant search for what is optimal these days. And what is optimal lacks context in most cases. So we talked about some people need a chainsaw, other people need a chisel. Well, a chisel might be optimal for Nick Walker, but a chainsaw is optimal for John Smith, who just picked up a barbell. And when the word optimal is actually misapplied in so many situations, because what's optimal in description is actually what's ideal. What's optimal is what's applicable. And that flows through every aspect of coaching, business, training, nutrition. We cannot look at this as, oh, well, I'm here, I need to get over here. So instead of taking the staircase, I'm going to start, using a pogo stick and start to jump up. Because if you're using a pogo stick, I guarantee you're going to fall, trip, and probably rupture both your quads like I did. I hope to God you do not. But,
Yeah.
With every step that you skip, you accept risk. That risk usually leads to a regression, and that regression usually is below where you were before. So you'll have to climb back up that ladder again.
You sort of mentioned it as a joke, but the other thing I know both ET and myself are really interested in talking about was actually your rehab.
Sure, man.
From your quad injury. I'm sure you've talked about it ad nauseum at this point, but
I think it's cool.
Like I'm fascinated.
That's good. Fortunate for us.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by. Actually, I'll say I appreciate how much you documented your recovery, because it was really interesting to watch. And we've talked about it, a little bit sort of in passing in the gym. Mm-hmm. I'll actually say this just before I sort of ask my question. I had a little bit of an inkling this year where, I competed in powerlifting for a period of time. I was very mediocre. And I sort of had this feeling where I was like, I never squatted 700. I'd like to. Never bench 500. I'd like to. I was like, maybe I do another meet or two. Like, I'm way bigger than I was back when I used to powerlift. So it was a little bit in the back of my head. And then I saw Stu's injury.
Not in your head anymore.
And then I saw your injury. I was like, I'm going to stick with sets of 15 on the leg press. Like, maybe I won't powerlift again. So I guess for people that don't know, which if they follow you, they probably have heard it. But for people that don't know, what was the injury? And then I want to start to talk about what were your first steps, maybe figuratively and literally, in your rehab process?
So my first steps took place 5.5 weeks after my injury.
Fuck.
Yeah. So I took 2.5 years off of powerlifting. That's when I dove into bodybuilding. I had been dealing with some ongoing hip and knee issues on my left side. I'm pretty sure I have a torn labrum. I've never gotten imaging, but ignorance is bliss. So I just kind of took some time away, worked with my coach, Danny Lamartina, Dr. Danny Lamartina, got to a point where I felt like I could, push my strength again, and I was healthy, and I was able to accumulate volume again on my lower body. Went to go do a tune-up meet, and on my third attempt, which for all intents and purposes is like a 3-rep max, 750 pounds, I lost my balance and shifted my weight too far back into my heels. And when I went to push out of that bad position, both my quad tendons ruptured. The actual injury itself was a bilateral avulsion fracture of my patella. So essentially the tops of my patellas fractured off, took my quads with it. I had surgery the next day, spent 9 days in the hospital, and then was transported home by my amazing mother-in-law, who drove up from Toronto to Collingwood to drive us 7 hours home. And then she took our dogs back to Toronto the next day. So absolute saint of a woman. I spent 5 weeks in a hospital bed in this office. We turned this office into a hospital room. And after that was just wheelchair, physio, active and passive rehab as much as I could. And then again, my first steps took place about 5-ish weeks after the initial injury. Funny you asked me about this. Myself and Stuart just put together a rehab guide for this injury. So all the details of the injury and the rehab process are going to be detailed in there, and we're going to give it away for free. So I can have a link for anyone who wants to download that guide. I'll give that to you guys. It'd be great if you could promote it.
For sure.
So starting off the rehab process, maybe it's best to frame the traditional rehab process. Did I cut out? Fuck. Am I back?
You're back.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
All good.
So I think it's best
to dial up over there.
Yeah. Finley Creek, man. So to frame the recovery process, essentially the first phase of recovery is passive range of motion. So while the bone heals, because the bone has to heal around the screws, the patella, the surgery, they clean up the bone, they reattach the quad tendon to the patella with 2 screws and some sutures, and you have to wait for the bone to heal around the screws. And that takes about 6 weeks for most people.
Mm-hmm.
During that process, you can start to introduce passive range of motion, and it's 10 to 15 degrees per week until you get to 120 passive. Then you can start to load isometrics, again, 10 to 15 degrees every week until you get to 120. Then you can start to load through those ranges, 10 to 15 degrees every week up to 120. And then you can start kind of training, quote unquote. To be fair, that puts you at like 24 weeks of rehab, 24 to 30 weeks of rehab before you can load the tissue. I didn't like that. So I was also doing a ton of things that most people were not doing. So when you talk about, I was in a wheelchair and in a bed for 24 hours a day, I was still spending about 8 hours a day doing something devoted to rehab. Whether it was me laying down with my heels elevated on a foam roller to achieve passive extension, whether it was sitting in a PEMF machine, whether it was using a muscle stim device, whether it was doing passive blood flow restriction training, whether it was doing corrective exercise for, hip flexors and knee extension. I did that for 5 weeks. As soon as my feet hit the floor, they said, okay, you're going to be in a walker with your knees extended for another 6 weeks. I think I lasted 3 hours in the walker. It was so uncomfortable. I just kind of used it for balance, but I wasn't using the walker. And I was walking with my knees extended for probably 2 weeks before it got annoying and it got lower back pumps so bad I wanted to cry. Because you're like hinged over, right? So you're forward in your balance and walking through your heels. It's really uncomfortable. As soon as I was able to achieve passive flexion, which I got to much faster, I started including blood flow restriction on a resistance bike. And that allowed me to spend more time in that end range and increase blood flow to a large degree. And I started training my isometrics every single day with 60-second holds. And I would rotate between seated leg curl, laying leg curl, leg press, leg extension for isometrics. And I would allow my range of motion. As soon as I could do the isometric without shaking, I would increase range of motion. And I was using these hinged knee braces so I could lock myself in 2 degrees of freedom. So it kept everything very safe. And then as soon as I was able to get full, well, I will say during that time too, anything that I could train to failure, I did. So we're talking about adduction, abduction, RDLs, hip thrusts, different types of like single leg RDLs. I was doing kettlebell swings, like anything I could train my legs in, I was training legs every other day. Then from there, as I start to get into more active loading, I started training my hamstrings as hard as possible because training hamstrings didn't hurt. That knee flexion was not painful. Knee extension was still painful. But then at that point, my hamstring strength came up so much that my quads relaxed and started increasing the ability to extend the knee, started being able to train mostly with blood flow restriction for the quads. Got into some, high goblet squats, leg pressing with a yoga block or a blocker, and then kind of just graded the exposure to range of motion and stimulus as I progressed through. And at about week 16, I think we're sitting at week 23 and a bit right now. At week 16, I was pretty much training normally. My range of motion was a little bit limited on things like pendulum squatting, just because that I was having trouble with. This is the only issue that I've had in my rehab was deep hip flexion with anterior translation of that knee. There was something going on with my scar where it was causing a ton of adhesion to the top of my kneecap, and I was getting referral pain behind my knee. So it was kind of preventing my tibia from rotating into deep flexion. That's since the last 2 weeks, I've had like a huge progression in that. So pretty much now just training, trying to get huge and, getting strong again. Leg press 6 plates for 30 reps the other day. So that was fun.
Yeah.
Insane, man. Insane.
Something I just wanted to touch on, because I kind of had the opportunity, just training at the same gym, I'll be honest, because I think the first time I saw you after the injury, like you still had the braces on and everything. Yeah. And just over the weeks, I just kind of kept my eyes, like I just kind of look and I'd sort of see what you were doing. And, I think probably as a fellow nerd, what I found really fascinating was just how methodical that graduated exposure was, that graded exposure, I should say. And I found it fascinating just to kind of watch from afar, because I was like, I can clearly see this plan. I can see this thought process. And it is it was bit by bit every single week. And I found that really interesting. And obviously, listening to you speak about that was clearly what the case was. And I remember even the period of time from, I think you were doing just literally like isometrics with essentially like full knee extension on the leg press, to the period of time I saw you doing full range of motion on the leg press. I was like, holy shit, that was fast.
I was super surprised. To be fair, I had the plan in my head. I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. This is how it's going to go forward. And I operated off of functional benchmarks. So with a lot of, recovery protocols, they operate on time benchmarks. It's like, by this time you should be doing this.
Yeah.
But when you have someone who is, has a very well-developed nervous system, carries a ton of muscle mass, is doing everything from the passive aspect, nutrition aspect, supplementation aspect, peptides aspect, to training with a methodical approach, I had to create a relationship with my physiotherapist where we operated off of these functional benchmarks. So it's like, when you can reach 120 degrees of flexion, now you can start to train isometrics through it. However long that takes you, it's going to take you. But we need to make sure that we're achieving these benchmarks before I clear you to move forward. I was very careful in respecting that relationship, because if I was on my own, I definitely would have been more aggressive, because the surgeon who took over my care wasn't the surgeon who did the surgery. Dr. Dave Simon here in Ottawa took over my care from the doctor who did my surgery in Collingwood, because Dave did my knee surgery in 2015, and he did me a favor. He didn't have to accept me into his care. So the last thing I was going to do was going to be to betray his trust. And I needed to make sure that he was on the same page with the physio and with myself, that we were going to operate as safely as possible. I think my physio still kind of has PTSD about me coming in and doing the things that I was doing. I remember the first time he had me doing blood flow restriction, knee extensions. He's like, okay, you're going to do a set of 30 and then, probably sets of 15. And I did 5 sets of 30 with the blood flow. He's like, okay, this is going to be weird. And I knew right away that it was going to be weird. And, you have, as a lifter, we have higher pain thresholds. We have higher ability to recruit muscle fibers. There's a whole host of primary, secondary, tertiary adaptations to training that we can leverage in a recovery process. But you do have to do it in a methodical fashion. And, we lay it all out in the book. I pretty much put my entire program in that book.
Cool. Well, I'm going to be picking that up for sure. There's two things that I wanted to kind of double click on. For those that are unfamiliar with it, could you explain and perhaps just elaborate a little bit on BFR and
for sure.
its usefulness, specifically in rehab? Because initially it was very much exclusively viewed as being this thing that was used for hypertrophy. If you wanted to have, bigger forearms or bigger biceps, people would use BFR. And it went through a phase, I feel like a few, perhaps 5 or so years back, where it was huge. And then now people don't use it as much, but there's seemingly some interesting applications when it comes to rehab. And so I'd love for you to kind of pull on that thread a little.
So let's start from the basics. So what blood flow restriction will do is it will prevent venous return, which will introduce a massive buildup of metabolites within the muscle. And that's very, very important, because that metabolite buildup is the beginning of the anabolic signaling process. And it also increases GLUT4 translocation within the muscle to allow carbohydrates to enter into that muscle fiber. When your body is immobile for more than 2 days, that muscle loses all insulin sensitivity. There's no reason for it to uptake glucose. There's no neural signal because you're having inhibition from the injury, and there's no movement signal because you're immobilized. So what you can do initially with BFR is passive blood flow restriction. The prescription is 100% blood pressure occlusion. And you do it for 15 minutes on, as many times a day as you want. The only worry with that is blood clotting. So if you are fully immobile and you're not taking a blood thinner, it's a bit dangerous. So if you were going to do blood flow restriction immobilized, I would make sure that you were able to like move your legs off the bed, allow that blood flow to come back up, just so you could have the return. Now, I did that while I was in the bed and I coupled it with electro muscle stimulation. So like an EMS system. The one I used was the Power Dot. Mm-hmm. Specific to recommend, a TENS is not the same as an EMS unit. So you want to have an alternating current as opposed to a direct current. Direct current decreases pain. Alternating current will go all the way through into the deep muscle fibers. So that's the initial intervention. The next is you can use blood flow restriction while you move. So I was using it on the stationary bike. So I would wear it for 5 minutes on, 3 minutes off at an 80% occlusion, just with an unloaded flywheel. Tons of metabolic buildup. You're also decreasing pain. So the sensation of that metabolite buildup blunts the pain response within the joint. So it allows you to access those deep end ranges that you might not otherwise have access with. You access them more often and for longer periods. Therefore, you hold them better. So that initial blood flow restriction on the bike was an area where I was able to get into that full knee flexion over and over and over again in a cyclical pattern with no eccentric load. And it helped me keep the range of motion and also prevent that metabolic adaptation. Then BFR allows you to train closer to failure with very, very light weights. So that is where the hypertrophy stimulus comes in. So I was initially doing like body weight leg extensions on both legs, probably every other day. So I'm training the quad quite a bit. And I was initially I'm reaching failure with nothing on that thing.
And to be clear, this isn't like your body weight on the leg extension machine. You're talking about the weight of your tibia.
My leg hanging off the edge of a bench.
Got you. There's a pretty big difference in terms of load between those two. So I just wanted to clarify.
You calling me fat?
Hey, I'm saying you've got wonderful calves, man. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I got you.
So yeah, that was another way. And then as soon as I was able to start loading the leg extension, I kept using the blood flow restriction. I still use it probably alternating weeks now. And it's something that I will include in my training forever. I think it's a phenomenal tool, especially when it comes to achieving greater degrees of range of motion and holding those degrees of range of motion, and being able to train muscles in the absence of joint pain. Like I have the crazy part about this whole thing is like, I have less knee pain now than I did before my surgery. And I have better range of motion on all of my movements now than I did before my surgery. It's crazy.
That's wild.
I never would have expected this. And I never would have expected that my recovery trajectory was as fast as it was. So the fact that, I'm sitting here 23 weeks out having leg press 6 plates for 30 reps with my knees in my armpits, like, I don't know.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you touched on it a little bit earlier, but also there's one of these other adaptations flowing outwards from your experience in bodybuilding as well as powerlifting is like pain tolerance. And I'm assuming also just your relationship with pain and discomfort. Yeah. To what perspective or to what point do you think that was an asset when it comes to your recovery?
I think it was a major asset because I understand what good pain and bad pain is, right? Like discomfort versus pain and injury is a big delineation to make. The other is I have a tremendous ability now to like propriocept. So take the hardest exercise for me to get back into was the pendulum squat, just because of that deep knee flexion aspect of it and the way the resistance profile is that the maximum load is where the most internal rotation of the hip is required. And hip internal rotation is not a strong suit of mine. I was able to say, okay, that rep hurt. What do I need to do on this subsequent rep in terms of bracing, foot pressure, hip control to avoid that pain on subsequent reps? And I've applied that principle across the board. Whether I'm doing a Bulgarian split squat or whether I'm doing a leg press, I still do have reps where it's like, ooh, that didn't feel good. I got to correct this. The other thing is moving very slowly through ranges. I think I was joking. I did a set of 13 on the leg extension the other day, and my set was 2 minutes and 47 seconds long. Right? That's annoying. But
yeah, that's fair. That's basically like the equivalent of doing a plank with your quads,
Right. But the goal there is like, I'm trying to keep the goal. And if I'm trying to avoid pain, I know that moving quickly in and out of positions is going to be something that is still a challenge for me, because that tendons are a relatively inert tissue, right? They don't necessarily change, but their ability to maintain a hydraulic quality and the ability to extend and store mechanical potential energy can be improved. So you can increase collagen synthesis and all that sort of stuff, but the tendon tissue itself, like, it's not necessarily going to change. You need to train it in a way that allows it to become resilient before it can become very active. And so using a lot of tempos definitely helped with that. But just to return back to the idea of pain, is like the understanding of, this is something I shouldn't be doing, or this is something I need to do better. And learning how to position myself in ways where I could perform the movement in a way that allowed me to be pain-free. And if that execution wasn't to the degree that I would want it to be for quote unquote like optimal stimulus, well, I'm still creating a runway of progression from there. Right. So, I might use the same load on the pendulum squat 3 weeks in a row, but maybe my foot position is 1 centimeter lower every set, or every exposure, to get down to a point where I am getting a ton of anterior knee translation and I am getting deep into that bottom position.
Love it.
That actually reminds me of a phrase that I heard somewhat recently, where it was the currency that we trade in training is stimulus. Where, to your point, I think I made a post somewhat recently, sort of talking around this, where I think people get really caught chasing the logbook, and like the logbook is a great tool, but I think of it as a proxy for stimulus. Mm-hmm. And to your point, like you may have used the same load several weeks in a row, but the stimulus was greater each and every exposure. Yep. So I think that's a really great point. I only really had one other question, specifically around the protocol with your rehab. You had sort of mentioned it in passing, and we talked about it a little bit before we started recording. It was just your implementation of different peptides.
Yep.
So myself, I actually very recently used BPC and TB500 because I tore the UCL in my elbow. Yeah, I did it in the summer. Don't play sports when you haven't played sports.
Best reaction to a UCL tear.
Yeah, the UCL tears suck, man. They're so tedious and painful.
For context, because I had, grew up playing tons of sports, some throwing sports where that elbow was a bit of an issue. Played softball for the first time in years this summer. I'm a very competitive person. Like, gunned it from center field, felt a pop, and I was like, fuck. Cannot do anything really overhead. Like, I can't throw like a cotton ball at this point. And training, luckily, especially in bodybuilding, training is not that dynamic. Mm-hmm. So I've been able to train around it, but I was like, certain positions, like there's this really distinct 100% like recreatable pain in my elbow. Finally was like, I don't know why I haven't used this. And my experience has been really interesting, where not only would I say the elbow's improved, I wouldn't say 100%. I'm not sure the degree to which my UCL is even attached. You can only, BPC can't reattach it. But I also noticed a lot of systemic improvements as well, where knees felt a lot better, low back felt a lot better. And that was a really fascinating part of the process as well. So where I'm going with this is to what degree do you think those peptides were helpful in your training, and maybe what do they actually do?
Sure. So to what degree were they actually helpful? I wish I could answer you unequivocally, because at the time I was using them, I was doing everything, right? I was doing BFR, I was doing EMS, I was doing PEMF. I was doing active rehab. I was, moving as much as I can, doing isometrics. Like my nutrition was on point. I was using nutritional supplementation specifically for like decreasing inflammation and stuff like that. So I can't tell you unequivocally, like these were the thing, but they definitely contributed. So I used 500 micrograms of BPC 157 per knee per day. BPC 157 is phenomenal for collagen synthesis as well as angiogenesis, so regenerating blood vessels in the area, decreasing inflammation, and improving healing time. BPC is great for tendons. When you're dealing with muscle issues, so if you have a muscle tear, the combination of BPC with TB500 is recommended. TB500 or thymosin beta 4. Both of these are gastric peptides, and they are the difference between the TB500 is it improves cell proliferation. So that's why it's a little bit better for muscle tears. I used 500 micrograms of TB500 again per knee per day. I extended that protocol for about 18 weeks. So until, I was back training fully good, I was using it every day. The other peptide that I experimented with for the first time during this process was GHK copper or GHKCU. This is the collagen specific peptide that was actually used primarily in cosmetics and skincare. And the wild part is my scars healed so fast, stupid fast. You can barely tell that I have scars on my knees anymore. And they're like 7 inches long. So like 7 inches long.
Yeah. At least
I used that for the first 12 weeks. And then I cut it out. I used 2 milligrams per day per knee. That one stings a lot. Like that was a really uncomfortable feeling. Then I also used growth hormone. I used a growth hormone a day. Obviously systemic benefits, healing benefits, recovery, sleep, all that sort of stuff. And then I also used 10 milligrams of Anavar a day. So Anavar or oxandrolone, for anyone who's unfamiliar, is an anabolic steroid, but the dosage of 5 to 10 milligrams a day is typically used in burn victims and cancer patients to prevent muscle atrophy and to improve tissue healing. The one thing to note about anabolic steroids and recovery, especially from tendon injuries, is excessive amounts of androgens can weaken tendons. But just the right amount for me was TRT, so testosterone, like clinical testosterone replacement. I'm not talking like 300 milligrams sports a week, TRT. Like sports TRT, whatever the fuck that means. A testosterone dosage that allowed me to remain in physiological range, which for me is 125 milligrams a week, does support improved tendon healing outcomes. So that's the protocol that I went with. Since then, I've also experimented with some injectable L-carnitine, which, just improving metabolic health. I'm in a phase of my life, or an era, as the kids say these days, where I'm really focused on longevity and quality of life and how good I feel. So my supplementation, since I'm back to training and my activity level, like I'm walking 12,000 steps a day, doing 30 minutes of cardio every day, not only to support healing, but also to support health. Supplementing with, injectable L-carnitine. I just played around with MOTS-C, which is
I've heard some really interesting things about that.
It's a mitochondrial peptide to help to increase mitochondrial function and biogenesis. Can't really say if I noticed anything just yet, but yeah, this is kind of the rabbit hole that I've been going down in terms of my own education. Fun fact, actually, that I just found out, the GLP-1 drugs, so like Ozempic, tirzepatide, and retatrutide, improve bone density. So had I known that, I might have played around with that during my recovery as well.
Yeah,
that's fascinating. One thing that's come up organically on many of our podcasts as of late has been how pharmaceuticals are usually created with one aim, with one goal in mind. And then later on, we realize, holy smokes, it has all of these other very positive benefits. And so this is like, very timely where you're saying like, oh yeah, now we're realizing that it has these benefits when it comes to bone density. Like, oh, fucking amazing. This is another way that we can use this compound as a means of helping people move forward in their lives.
And I will say, whenever the discussion, like as a coach, whenever the discussion of anything that isn't like food comes into play and you are discussing implementation of these things, it should be a discussion with your clients and you're providing them the information that they need and the potential benefits, risks, and trade-offs that are associated with it. And ultimately it has to be their decision whether to go forward with it or not. And if you're recommending anything to anybody, you need to understand whatever you're implementing to the very deepest degree so that when and if side effects occur with your clients, you can direct them in the way that helps them come out of that in the best way possible. It's like, do no harm, right?
I'm really, really happy you brought that up. That's something I feel like very, very strongly as a coach. We both work or have worked with bodybuilders and other people who have been on the enhanced side. And I think that those conversations can be really, how do I phrase this? Like lackluster. There's almost like a very little care.
I agree.
And something, it's come up on this podcast, and ET and I talk about this quite a bit for a variety of reasons. Like I'm pretty transparent about my own like PED use. And with that being said, I feel so strongly about the fact that like your role, as you said, doing no harm, your role as a coach, if that conversation comes up, is education, it's information. They have to make that choice. Mm-hmm. And my job isn't to say, oh, you want to be a pro? Like I've seen protocols. This is a rabbit hole we don't have time to go down today, but in particular on the female side of things.
Oh, don't even
we're hoping potentially to get Olivia on here at some point because I actually want to talk about this. We will get you started
on another episode.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's like you see some of these protocols that, coaches, usually male coaches, get their female clients to use, and they are not risk adverse at all. They are, dangerous for a variety of reasons. They lack a lot of foresight. Anyway, I think we believe probably the same thing here, but I'm really glad you brought that up because I think that's an important aspect.
You want to blow your mind? I had a client who I recently inherited from another coach, 53 years old, was on DNP for 3 months.
Oh my God.
For those people who listen,
she just had a cardiac arrhythmia.
Nope. She was lucky. Nothing happened.
Wow. Okay.
Liver and kidney were a little bit shitty, but not terrible. So for people who don't know what DNP is a byproduct of TNT or dynamite manufacturing, and it acts as a protein uncoupler within the mitochondria. So instead of your metabolic processes leading to ATP synthesis, it leads to heat. So and it builds up in your tissues. So one of the side effects is you can actually cook yourself to death.
Yeah,
it was pulled off the market.
Fuck with DNP.
It was pulled off the market because it was killing people.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that it heats you up is, I guess, like kind of. It tracks with the fact that it comes from TNT. So
yeah,
that's kind of there's the logical jump there. That's insane. I've never heard of this.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. And people will prescribe we mentioned it initially, like when we were talking about business, about integrity. This industry, in the search of results and transformation pictures, has become somewhat nefarious. Yeah. And it's our job through conversations like this to provide the best information possible to help people make better, more informed decisions. And I will say that if you are hiring a coach and your coach doesn't have a conversation with you about health and what your life's going to look like in 10, 15, 20, 30 years, it's probably not going to be the coach that you want to work with.
Agreed. Ryan, I know we have some rapid fire questions ready for you, Paul.
Ooh,
what do you say we dig in? Yeah,
let's do it.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, so we do this with every guest. We've got, it was originally 10, it's now 9 rapid fire questions. Just first thing that pops in the top of your head. So question 1 is,
Boobs.
What is your favorite? You win. Nice. That's it. That's the answer to all of them. What is your favorite book, movie, and concert?
My favorite book is Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. That book completely changed my life. Favorite movie, top of my head, probably He Got Game with Denzel Washington and Ray Allen. I played basketball like until my first year of university, so Big hooper.
Cool.
And what was the last one? Song?
Concert.
Concert? I went to the Black Keys. That was pretty incredible.
Dope. Favorite and least favorite food?
Favorite food is cookies. Least favorite
Power
food.
lifter at heart.
Oh, dude, cookies. Dude, especially like, there's a company here in Ottawa called Toro Treats. 10 out of 10 recommend. My wife and I are cookie connoisseurs. Least favorite food. I don't like very heavy curry stuff.
Okay.
That's kind of weird, but
Is it like the heat or like the cream in a
the
curry?
texture, like it's like in the smell, like it's I can't do it.
Okay.
Proudest moment outside of business? Sorry, did you catch
Getting
that?
married for sure.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
My proudest moment outside of business. Yeah, getting married, 100%.
Cool.
As a hooper, favorite athlete growing up?
Kobe Bryant.
Good answer.
The Mamba.
What 3 values guide you?
Care, empathy, and professionalism.
Your favorite and least favorite lift?
Squat and squat.
That's a very healthy relationship, I think. Yeah.
Dude, the thing is, man, like the squat caused me all of my physical issues, but it was also the lift that I got the most like fulfillment out of, like just the imagery of a squat, having the weight of the world on your back and standing up, and I was able to do that with 800 pounds more than 14 times. So
That's
like,
sick.
it's pretty cool.
What is one misconception about you?
That I'm unapproachable. I mean,
Uh,
yeah, that I'm unapproachable. I'm a very nice guy. I just don't look like it all the time.
You're the one guy with an RBF.
I know.
It's an RPF, resting Paul face.
Yeah, resting ball face. There you go.
City or country that you would love to visit?
Oh, Liv and I were supposed to go on our honeymoon. We're 2 weeks after I got hurt, and we're going to go to Croatia and Northern Italy. So those two would definitely be on the top of my list.
Cool.
And our final question, what is one hard truth that personal trainers or coaches who are trying to grow their business need to hear?
This takes time. If you're not willing to put at least 10 years into it, don't start.
It's a good answer.
Love that. Yeah. Good growth takes time, right? Especially
Absolutely.
when you remain tethered to your values and you do things out of integrity. I'm sure I speak for you here, Ryan. It's definitely something that we share. And it's been a real treat. Yeah, it's been a real treat getting to know you, man. I really appreciate you
100%.
like spending the time and also just giving your energy to Ryan and I, and then also to anyone that's going to come across this episode. For those that are interested in learning about you, kind of like following your journey, perhaps going back in your Instagram and kind of like looking at the whole journey of your knee rehab, which was really fascinating. I was definitely one of them that was creeping you, on a regular basis. Or if someone wants to work with you in a mentorship capacity or as a client, how can they go about doing that?
So you can find me on Instagram at Paul Oneid. I'm also, my personal YouTube channel is at Paul Oneid _MAP. You can find me at Coach's Corner U on Instagram or Coach's Corner U on YouTube as well. The websites for both companies, www.masterathletic.com if you want to work with myself or any one of our team members. And the mentorship continuing education side is www.coachescorneru.com. And for anyone that is listening, if you want access to our Coaches Corner University Education Collective, which is 200 hours of continuing education lectures on everything from business, nutrition, biomechanics, exercise prescription, everything like that. If you use code podcast300, you get lifetime access for $50.
Sweet.
Solid deal.
There you go.
Amazing, man. Well, Paul, thank you so much, man. Once again, like it's been a real treat getting to know you and hearing your story and like, how would I say there's more to you than what you can see online.
I appreciate that. That's a very big compliment.
I knew that, but then having the opportunity to hear you speak live today and also watch you speak. You can tell that there's a depth of understanding behind the words that you choose and how they're really intentional. Yeah, I highly recommend that people check out your content, because I think like you have a lot to share, and I'm happy that we were able to give you a microphone, so to speak, today, and help other people get to know you to a greater degree.
Absolutely. And, I'm going to have Ryan on my podcast, next couple of weeks. So Etienne, I'd love to have you on as well, for sure.
Cool, man. Yeah, I would love that.
Thanks.
Amazing. Well, listen, man, have a great day. Nice connecting with you, and hopefully it won't be the last time.
Yeah, for sure. Talk to you soon, guys.
Cheers.